Okay, perfect. And thank you for the introduction. Emily mentioned I'm looking at national libraries and their role in open science, particularly how they can serve remote researchers. So I was looking at national legal deposit libraries, and these libraries use legal deposit as to allow them to really collect and preserve the cultural heritage of their nation. But legal deposit in and of itself can be a barrier to access as well as that content, often requiring on-site access. Something to note about national libraries in general is they're moving into more of an equal partner in research production. So as they move into this role, and as research in general and researchers are increasingly seeking virtual access to content, national libraries have an opportunity, I believe, through open science to connect with virtual research and to aid in the research process as well. So they're beginning to explore a number of different initiatives, but a lot of the research right now is on academic libraries and their role, or even all stakeholders in general. There's not a lot of guidance specifically catered to national libraries. And they're certainly unique from academic libraries and the audiences that they serve. So I was curious to just provide an overview of this relationship to give national libraries sort of a reference or a jumping off point for their involvement in open science. And with research increasingly becoming virtual, I was focusing, like Milena mentioned, on digital services and tools to promote remote research. So I was curious what services and tools are being used globally. Are legal deposit collections able to be used in any of these? What are some of the major challenges national libraries are facing in their open science involvement? And then how may their role progress or look like moving into the future in open science as well? So I had 3 parts to my original study. The first was a mixed review, so both scoping and systematized. And this was looking at articles from 7 different databases. I looked at traditional, but then also at open access, like the Directory of Open Access Journals, from the past 10 years, national legal deposit libraries, and different digital services and tools that they were using. I pulled descriptive info for the scoping review, but then I did a thematic analysis for the systematized review. That was for those challenges and future directions portion. The second part of my study was interviews. This was to sort of confirm the findings from my literature review, but also to see if there was anything that was missed. Originally, when I did this study, I did have a particular focus as well on the National Library of Scotland. For the purpose today, I'm just going to be focusing on more of the broader findings. So I'll be skipping that final part case examples, but that's why you'll notice the majority of my interviews were with employees from the National Library of Scotland and other UK libraries as well. So I found in my scoping review, there were largely European publications. There was no research published from South and Southeast Asia, Africa, South America, or Canada. And like I mentioned, no systematic, no scoping, no mapping reviews. But 9 of the 45 articles did discuss use of legal deposit collections. So a couple of those notable uses were open source software. That was to complete automatic subject indexing of e-legal deposit materials. They also talked about using legal deposit collections to train AI language models. And then finally, another notable area was opening up of citation data and other metadata on the legal deposit collections as well. So I created a mind map of some of my findings. This was to illustrate National Library's role in open science, so what areas of open science they're involved in, but then also the services and tools that are currently in use internationally. This is as covered in the current research from our literature review. So it's a little bit small, it's on the left over here, but if you zoom in to the top of my illustration, I took a look at what areas of open science appeared in the literature. So the darker areas, hopefully you guys can see that, were compliance with fair data principles. These are the areas that were covered most heavily: open science infrastructures, open engagement of social actors, and open data as well. But I did actually find that all of the areas of open research that I included were covered in literature. And just if you're curious, I pulled areas from UNESCO's recommendations on open science, but then supplemented as well with some additional areas from the League of European Research Universities. But I was surprised to see, again, like I mentioned, that all of the areas appeared. So that indicated to me that national libraries can play a role in all areas of open science. Now for the bottom half of my illustration, this is where I really went through the digital services that are currently in use. So I mentioned which ones appeared in literature, but then also the digital tools and how they may interact with each other, which could be used together as well. So some of the more well-established areas I found in the research were digital libraries and citation standards, but there were also some emerging areas. And emerging areas were what I defined as topics or services and tools that were appearing more frequently as years went on in the literature, particularly in an experimental way, or they were mentioned by authors as like a next step or a future direction within the movement. So that was things like the AI tools and automatic subject cataloging. It was evaluation frameworks with alternate metrics, text and data mining, citation indexes, and knowledge graphs as well. There were a couple of underrepresented areas that I found. That included emulation software, collaborative platforms, and digital preservation methods too. So in terms of my more thematic analysis, the systematized review and interview findings, there were a number of themes that I found in terms of the challenges faced and the future directions when national libraries are attempting to implement open science. I don't have time to cover, obviously, all of these themes, so I figured I would just focus on a few that I found particularly interesting. In terms of the challenges, uniformity in standards here, or really a lack thereof, was identified in the literature and supported by the interviews. There are a multitude of organizations providing guidance on open science, but when viewed internationally, it's fairly fragmented. There are conflicting definitions, there are a lot of different infrastructures and best practices suggested. And even when creating my mind map, I noticed there were different terms used in different articles to describe some of the same services and tools, which made creating that overview a bit more difficult. Within that theme, technology is rapidly changing, and so are some of the standards within open science. So all of these things just make interoperability difficult for individuals. And it makes it difficult for those within national libraries to get coworkers on board and to get institutional policies in place around open science. Another challenge was the interpersonal and cultural barriers. And this was discovered just through the interviews. It was actually the most significant constraint that was noted in the interviews. And staff kept bringing up this fear of risk in terms of getting involved in open science, whether that was financial risk, legal risk, ethical risk, or something else. And this theme additionally covered trust between users and institutions. So there is a distrust growing around emerging technology such as AI. And then a final area within this theme was just misalignment between like user expectations and realistically what the National Library can provide people. In terms of future directions, I thought dissolving of boundaries was a fairly interesting area. That was identified in both literature and interviews. But as data is becoming more open and linkable, distinct boundaries between online platforms have been predicted to disappear. There's more collaboration, there's more shared ownership of content. And one of the interviewees I talked to predicted that digital access may move away from traditional websites entirely and move more towards chat-based interfaces, which I thought was pretty interesting. Another direction from the literature and from the interviews was user analysis. So this is something that has been covered pretty extensively in the literature in terms of our lack of understanding of different user bases at the National Library and the design of services around them. But I found through the interviews as well is that there's a trend towards increased interaction with audiences on online platforms. And this increased interaction allows for the tracking and collection of user metrics that they can then use to evaluate services, to increase engagement, and to develop more alternate metrics, which is a very useful next step for these libraries. So there was still a number of gaps, even after my literature review, after my interviews. Again, I'm not going to touch on them all, but for me, what really was standing out was the lack of a clear framework for national legal deposit libraries and their adoption of open science. So to me, that is a critical next step, is the development of a framework for national libraries. They're unique from other libraries and institutions. You know, they serve a much wider user base as somewhere else, like an academic library. They have access to an unmatched amount of content, and they're often positioned more closely to the government, which can be restrictive, but it can also potentially put them in a position of enhanced influence. So to me, this means that they really need their own more specific guidance to be able to become involved in open science. But before we can create a framework, it's important that we explore the Global South more deeply so we can make these findings and suggestions more broadly applicable, but also user intersectionality. So how a barrier like language, or a disability may affect virtual access, that will help with the development of more inclusive services. Because we want to know, before we advance with these emerging technologies and these infrastructures, are we closing access gaps or are we unintentionally widening them, which is something that's important to look at. Because I believe that national libraries are uniquely positioned to promote open science and to serve as an example for other institutions themselves. So it's important that we give them the path to move forward and to do so. So that is just the quick summary. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Alice. We have few librarians here, plus researchers and people from other types of institutions. Any questions or comments for Alice?